one ways to improve the living wage policy is to directly talk with unions and explain to them that uh, the city is committed to, I would say, the to include a living wage policy of $20 to all city staff, contracted out and within city uh, opportunities.
Okay, so you would go even beyond like what the CCPA calculated as a living wage for Winnipeg.
Correct.
Well, I guess your first point is quite an assumption, right? That it's an inadequate living wage policy. Here's the thing: we need to drive up private sector. We need to drive up wages in Winnipeg. Okay. Right now, though, one of the challenges is that in the city of Winnipeg, we really do have a two-tiered system in terms of incomes. I think that we can all agree to that. More than half of the civic employees are on what's called the Sunshine List, which means that they make more than $75,000 a year. Did you know that? And there is also a huge chunk of people that are getting paid really, really crappy pay, right? So we have this huge gap in the system. And that's why I have proposed a wage freeze for every member of the Sunshine List. And what that will do for us is it will provide more money into the budget. It's one of the items that allows me to say that that allows me. Can I just start that again, right? It's one of the it's the reason, it's one of the reasons, and it's one of the ways that I'm going to pay for the things that I'm proposing, right? Because I have proposed some bold new things, and some of the things that I'm proposing will cost money. And of course, the big question is, what are you going to cut, right? What are you going to cut, Jenny? And that's always the big question. And I put it right in my platform. In fact, there's a page in my platform called, "What are you going to cut, Jenny?" And at the top of that page is that I'm going to freeze the wages of all of Winnipeg's highest paid employees. And the reason that I'm going to do that is because I think it's time for them to give a little bit more so that the rest of us can recover. Some people think that because some people think that I must, because I'm pro money and I'm pro jobs and I'm pro investment, some people think that that must mean that I'm anti-worker. And it actually couldn't be more different. Because when we create more jobs and there's more competition for the employees in the city, that's what drives up wages, right? Is that. And I am absolutely committed to making that happen.
So just maybe like the preamble of the question kind of through you is why we say the living wage is inadequate is simply when they brought it in, they committed to $15 by 2024. We now have a provincial government that is committed to that to 2023, but unfortunately $15 an hour was a living wage in 2018.
Right, and we are at a 50-year high of inflation, right? And so that's why those targets don't mean anything. Okay, that's why they're useless. When you start setting these arbitrary numbers, because you whenever that was, right? And I remember a few years ago, there were cities all over North America that were committing to these so-called living wages. Great in the moment. Until then what? Until inflation happens, until the world changes. And that's why what we really need to do is we really need to turn this city into the Canadian leader in growth and investment, where companies are flocking to invest their money in places like Centerport and create good jobs, because the more good jobs we create, the higher the paychecks are for everybody.
Well, I think the first thing, specific to 311, I said I would add more money to 311 to make sure that we are retaining 311 operators, reducing the call wait times. In fact, I said that we would increase the 311 budget by 25% per year until we get those call wait times down to 3 minutes. So I've put funds there for retention and recruitment. A lot of this, though, is also worked through the collective agreement process. And so I know that the bargaining units have certainly living wage topic on their agenda in their discussions. Of course, as the politicians, as the mayor, would not be directly involved in the one-on-one negotiating. That is our labor department that does that. But I know these are, living wages and compensation is a matter that our collective bargaining units speak of and talk about and raise in their discussions.
When I was doing my findings, I found out that in Winnipeg, I read it, like a family of 4, maybe with 2 working parents, it's a must to earn $18.34, I think, in that range, neighborhood range. But right now, it is not, right? So there is a need to have an increment. My philosophy is to sit down, negotiate and figure out how we can increase that incrementally. You know what? One thing I've realized so far is we need to work together as a team. When the union, when they see what we have on ground, we'll talk. We'll engage them. We'll not sit down. We are going to do something. We have to do something. But it has to be incremental. We will not get there one day, but it's going to be a gradual process. But the first thing is to engage with them and let them understand that, this is how we are going to arrive, at the amount they desire to have.
I'm 100% definitely committed to. I think that that city workers under my leadership will be given a living wage. Now, I know that for whatever reason, this somehow becomes some very contentious issue, and I don't, from a human rights perspective, from a lifting people out of in your face poverty or behind the scenes poverty, it's the right thing to do. So number one, we take the leadership on that, because I could tell you, working in government, working with First Nations, working in law, working with all these different organizations that I've been doing for so many years, when somebody takes the lead on it, other people will follow. So we should be the leaders on that. We have city workers who are making minimal money, right? Struggling in their own homes, doing the job that we're asking them to do. At times, frontline workers. Then we complain, our libraries are not funded, or our pools don't have access to people. We take the right steps. The right step is lift everyone up the best that we can. A living wage under my leadership will be, dedicated. It's a dedicated thing. I just haven't announced it yet, but that is something I'm definitely committed to.
Well, what would you follow? Please go.
Please.
Yeah. So living wage policy, generally, we think of it as including both city workers. So there's people in areas like the library that are below $15 an hour still, and those need to be brought up. But also contracted workers, because we have a lot of areas like garbage collection, snow clearing, that we're contracting out, and those workers are often some of the lowest paid. Would your living wage policy include
That's a great question, and again, I'm a truth teller. I actually didn't consider that far. I think that is something me and my team will go back and do some research on. Would I? Yes. Yes. So I think just big picture, right? I believe that the only way for our city to move forward is to get people out of the mess that they are in. The reality of the situation is that there are things that are going on publicly, unfortunately, disrespectfully on display for us to all gawk at and take pictures at and act like that's the right thing to do, which is absolutely not. But there are also a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes in families, behind closed doors. So homelessness is not just the homelessness we see on the streets. We see a lot of women who are fleeing domestic violence, who are basically just couch surfing. We see a lot of young adults who are either moving in with their parents, or if they're not moving in with their parents, they are just kind of figuring out where to stay. These are very serious issues, and we just need to be very sincere in our approach to these issues. And again, once we get to that point, all of those big things that we want, those massive desires, those big dreams we have for our city, only then will those things be or ever come into fruition. We're not going to be able to have those big things without taking care of people, lifting people out of the situation they're in, especially after COVID, especially the marginalized.
Or will be raising minimum wage to $15, but obviously it has to keep pace with inflation, making sure that people and families have a wage which they can support themselves on.
Mm-hmm. So you support the city of Winnipeg being a living wage employer?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Completely. Yes.
Okay.
No one should have to make tough decisions if they're working for the city of Winnipeg.
Okay.
It should be an employer of choice.
All right. Then do you have an idea of what you would do to make that happen?
Well, I think that's negotiations that have to happen with the unions, and then also with the city council, making sure it fits within the budgetary guidelines. But at the end of the day, you either believe in it or you don't.
First of all, the cost of not having a living wage is very expensive. I mean, if you look at the fact that our waiting pools aren't open, it's because lifeguards can't job offers at Tim Hortons pay better than that. And so it's about starting to put greater value on people's labor and realizing that that is important to stabilizing access to service. The 311 program, Gordon Delbridge keeps on telling me, has been running about 40% staff rates. So if you're down 60% because you're paying, so you can't maintain the integrity of services, which is why I go back. So how do you pay for it? Do any modeling? I mean, if you want to spend a lot of money building major new regional road systems, you're not going to be able to do anything. As a matter of fact, you're going to see the further deterioration. If you're going to use the back-end loaded solutions of just waiting for, just adding more pressure on the police calls on 911, you're not going to get it. So, I mean, if someone actually comes up with a way with any equitable, intelligent solution could be found out of existing revenues to really start tackling the city's serious problems, I would say that's a fantasy. So this whole idea of spending 2023 actually benchmarking that. So the first question would be, our planning department is running at 40% the budget on a per capita basis of the average Canadian city planning department. That's really important to neighborhood planning and that. So you can't maintain that. And you're not going to get on property taxes to close the gap and ever get reelected with the raises that you'd have to get. And if you're doing the incrementalism with some candidates are talking about, it'll be 2070 and we'll still be behind the 8 ball. So we need to completely restructure funding. The problem, I disagree with some people who completely say in every mayoralty debate, a number of them, it's not about money. And it's sort of weird because there's one on the left and there's one on the right, Kevin Klein and I'll say their names, Sean Loney, both I respect, and I particularly respect Sean because he's a smart guy with lots of integrity, really like him. And would love to work with him. But I mean, this is where I disagree with some people. I won't label their politics, but people who say that, to me, there's a consistent kind of diminishment of the importance of just good, old-fashioned, well-funded public services. And a well-funded library is really important. A well-funded community health. Yes, you can layer on all kinds of things that employ people, that generate revenue, that create jobs, and generate more financial capacity. But I do not believe realistically at any kind of significant scale is a substitute for fully funded programs. And I will stay by that. And if you want fully funded programs, you're going to need to get back to where we were before, bringing new revenues, getting a new deal for cities. And when I ran, I went to 90 people in the community. I ran out of time and said, look, I'm not asking you to vote for me, but on October 27th, would you stand with me to create the kind of change that we need?
We hire a lot of people and pay them wages that they're not able to raise their families in a proper way. So I want to say to city councilors and to the public, like, we can't just look at the amount of money that's going to people on an hourly basis. We have to consider all of the costs and all of the benefits. And if there's people in Winnipeg who are able to pay their bills, that's a fantastic thing for the city. If their kids, if they don't have to move all the time because they've got more financial stability, that's fantastic for the city. So I think we need to consider these things. And the second thing is, if you're doing business with the city of Winnipeg, we need to say your entire company needs to meet a minimum wage threshold. And what I'd like to do is to start that out at $15 an hour, just to kind of get people used to what this looks like. And I realize it's not a significant immediate jump, but then we have the mechanism in place to be able to move that. But I want Winnipeggers to know the financial benefits of paying people decent wages.
Well, first of all, on some of the wage discussion, we looked at a number of departments in the city that have lower wages or lower incomes, than some of the other departments, particularly 311, dispatch, recreation services, maybe even library services, those kinds of things. And we looked at I looked at those for a couple of reasons. And one thing I know coming out of the pandemic as a business owner as well is that it's been pretty hard to find staff. And so the beautiful thing about this right now for people is that they have a lot of options as well. Unemployment is relatively low considering, that the fact that we just came out of a pandemic. But the city is not going to be able to remain competitive if they're not looking at raising some of these wages in the city. And we're already seeing that with, high turnover in 311, police dispatch. It's already affecting us. And that it affects us all negatively because it results in the type of service and that we all get as Winnipeggers. So that was my first point. My first thought there is that to remain competitive, we're going to have to look at it. And $15 an hour, is roughly $30,000 a year. And so if you look at that from an affordability standpoint, you'd have to, like when you include rent and food and all of your other things, it's much more challenging these days to do that on your own. Maybe it's different if you have if you have 2 income earners in your household, but there are a lot of people who don't have that, and there's single family, single parent families can be pretty hard to do that. So from a city's perspective, $18 an hour I think would work out to roughly $36,000 a year. So even that, it can be a pretty big struggle right now, to live and to afford some of the basic, the lower rents in our city at the moment. And so those are definitely some of the things I would look at as the income structure that we have in our city right now and see if we can bring that up, because if we don't, like I said, we just won't remain competitive and we are going to suffer from attracting talent because they're going to go